Hello, welcome to my channel, The Orchid Hut. My name is Dana, and thank you for taking some of your time today to drop in for another orchid video. This one is going to be about a couple of issues that I'm having with the Dendrobiums in my collection, or rather at least 3 of the Dendrobiums in my collection. And I'm going to kind of walk you through the history of the orchids and how I came to notice the problem, how I identified the problem, and then what I did to treat it and what I will probably need to continue doing as I'm watching these orchids recover. And the first 2 that are in front of the camera are 2 of the Dendrobiums that I purchased at the beginning of the fall of last year. So I've only had them in my collection for, you know, maybe 3 months or so. And they were growing outside at the nursery that I purchased them from, but they had been shipped from Hawaii originally. And when I brought them home, I continued to keep them growing outside near the Orchid Hut, probably until October time frame. And then they came in the garage and were mostly in the garage for the month of October, where I could keep it warmer at night. And then into November, they were moved into the house under the new grow light setup that I've previously videoed for you guys. So since, I would say, mid-November, so maybe like the last 7 weeks or so, they've been indoors. Well, I would say maybe about 2 weeks ago, I noticed on both of these plants, and they were purchased at the very same time from the same nursery, you know, have been side by side for the last several months at least. I noticed this sort of white spotted pitting on some of the leaves, and it was on the top side of the leaves, and it was also showing up on the bottom side of the leaves. And these white little specks were on the older leaves, so it was affecting the older leaves, but it was also affecting some of the new growth, and I'll see if the camera can focus in on that. So, you know, knock wood, I have not had a lot of pest, fungal, bacterial problems with my orchids, whether indoors or outdoors. So that's not one of the things that I'm well versed in, because I haven't had to deal with a lot of that. So at first I thought, oh my goodness, you know, it's some sort of mosaic virus. These are going to have to go in the trash, you know, and I had just spent good money on these. I was a little bit perturbed at the notion of that. But let me show you this other one, because it's a similar situation. You can see like the white spotting on the new leaves there, but then you can see on this older leaf that there's some of the white spotting. But as I did some research, I came to the conclusion that it was most likely not a virus. But, you know, of course, the first thing I did when I noticed this is I isolated the plants. I moved them away from all of the others, because until you figure out what's going wrong, you don't want whatever the infestation is to spread to every plant that you have. So they were isolated immediately as I saw this, and I started doing research to try to figure out, did I need to just discard them, or was there some sort of treatment that might help? Well, as I was doing that research, I also noticed, and this ends up being sort of a telltale symptom of the actual problem that was going on here, but there was like some fine, like silk, spider webbing, kind of cobwebby kind of stuff going on in between one small section of leaves on this larger Dendrobium. And I just brushed it away with my fingers. But then as I continued to do more research, that was actually the webbing from a spider mite infestation. Okay, so that is what I think is affecting these orchids. So let me talk a little bit more about that. First of all, it's not really a spider. It's not like the eight-legged spider that we tend to think of. It's more of a plant parasite. And the spider mite will actually suck on the juices of the leaves and will extract and destroy the chloroplasts. So the reason that you see the white pits on the leaves is because the chlorophyll, the green chlorophyll, is no longer there. And so they can do significant damage to your plant. One of the things that makes spider mites more prolific in the winter is because when your orchids are outdoors, natural rainfall tends to wash off the spider mites, and it keeps any kind of infestation under control to the point where you don't even notice it. And then there are also other insects and parasites that feed on the spider mites when your orchids are outdoors, and when you bring them in, those predator type insects and parasites are no longer there to keep the bad spider mites under control. And they also tend to thrive a bit more in drier environments. So when you bring your orchids in, the environment is a bit drier and the spider mites have no predators, so they tend to multiply more quickly. Now, the thing that makes them difficult to treat is that you can have several different phases of the spider mite life cycle going on simultaneously. So you can have eggs, you can have larvae, and you can actually have the adult spider mite going on at the same time. And when you treat your orchid, the treatment may not be as effective on all of those stages, so you have to come back and treat again to make sure that you really eliminate all of the different life cycle phases of the spider mite. So what I did is I sprayed these with neem oil. That's one of the suggested treatments. You can also, I believe, use alcohol on a cotton swab if it's a small infestation. Mixing in a little bit of mild detergent is sometimes useful to get the treatment to stick to the leaves. There is a link on the American Orchid Society page about spider mites, and it actually shows some photos of a Phalaenopsis leaf that was attacked by spider mites. And it's a great article if you want to learn about the different types of spider mites that affect orchids. It talks about treatments that work. It talks about why the infestations happen, which I explained a little bit earlier in this video. And, you know, I don't want to go into all of those details because you really just have to read the article to get all of that information. But very, very useful and helped me kind of identify what's going on here. So now that I have treated these orchids with neem oil twice, so I did it one day and then I waited a day and I did it a third day. And now in another few days when the weather is a little bit nicer outside, I will take these orchids out and I will spray them again just to make sure that there's not anything still going on. One of the things that they say you can do, and let me see if I can find the place on this orchid to point out one of the sort of indications that you might have some spider mites. It's a little bit of, it's really, really hard to see. And the spider mites themselves are microscopic, so that's, it's not going to be something that you're going to be able to see with the naked eye. Okay, here we go, right here. Okay, so I'm going to try to show you this leaf joint right here. And there's one mature leaf here that was affected by the spider mites. But if you look down in that leaf joint right beneath my finger, you can still see some of the leftover webbing from the spider mites. Now, I don't know if those spider mites are still active down in there, but they say that one of the things you can do is take like a tissue and just run it over the place where you think the spider mites might be, And the spider mites are sort of yellowish, greenish color, orangey color. And if you pull the tissue out and you get a colored stain on there, then it might indicate that the infection is still active. Now that looks more like sort of dust and dirt to me. So I'm not really seeing any coloration on that tissue, but it's, you know, suggested that if you think you have an active infection going on, just go ahead and wipe, you know, under the leaf with the tissue. And, you know, in this case, I don't know if the camera's going to be able to focus on that, but there are some tiny, tiny, tiny little spots there. It's possible that those are dead spider mites. I'm not certain. But in any case, they're going to get another treatment and they're going to stay isolated just for good measure. Okay, so that's the 2 Dendrobiums with issues. Let me see, I'll give you the names on these. They both bloomed just beautifully in the fall. I would really hate to lose these. So that's the larger Dendrobium. Rhodostictum number 1 crossed with little atro. And then the smaller Dendrobium is Maiden Charlotte. And that's Rhodostictum crossed with aberrans. Okay, so I've set up a special grow light just for these 2 orchids. They get to stay with each other until this problem is resolved. Okay, so this next Dendrobium is my green lantern Dendrobium, a black hair type Dendrobium. And I don't know, this one just maybe has just had problems since the beginning. It was a better grow orchid. I'll put a link up above on the right hand corner that shows me repotting this video. It was unbagged from a local home improvement store and had a lot of spotting on the leaves. Those leaves dropped and I thought the problem was resolved, and then after a few more weeks some more leaves dropped. And I'm not particularly concerned with Dendrobiums losing their leaves because they often do that during the winter or on older canes. But this one has just continued to have a problem. And what's been going on now is that from the top of this largest cane, it just seems to have a slow wilt. There were 2 more leaves on the top of this, and they just wilted and fell off. And I've been watching this part of the cane here, and it is just slowly turning brown and going down, down, down the cane. Well, when I started this video today, my thought was going to be, well, just to kind of eradicate this, I might just decide to leave some healthy tissue here and cut these next 2 leaves that are wilting right off the plant, and maybe I will be done with this situation. But when I pulled this orchid out from the shelf, now what I notice is that inside this part that has turned brown, there appears to be a new leaf growing from the top. I'm hoping that the camera can focus on that. So, now that has pulled off, and I have a feeling that if I wait just another day or 2, this other brown part will also pull off. And there's a new leaf coming from the middle, although this leaf is curling and wilting, and this leaf is also curling and wilting. So I do not know what's going on here. But if I was going to cut this, I had a little bit of hydrogen peroxide ready and a Q-tip, because I was thinking once I cut it, I would dab that cut with the hydrogen peroxide. I didn't want to spray it down the cane because some of that moisture could stay in between the leaf joints, and that's not going to help the problem. But I think what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to touch the outside of this with hydrogen peroxide, and I'm not really seeing any kind of fizzing that's going on here. So that's good. I don't want to get it overly wet. Let's do the other side. And I am doing this in the morning so that in case it is wet, it has opportunity to dry. And I'm just painting the surfaces here. There are, you know, some different situations where orchids sort of like correct and repair themselves. If you're patient and wait long enough, maybe this is one of those situations. I don't know. But this new growth I'm also noticing is a little bit yellow here on the tip, so I don't know if it's going to be a failed new growth. But I'm going to wait and see now. See what happens with that new leaf that's coming from the top. Okay, so I don't know what's wrong with this one. If anybody has any ideas, please feel free to leave a comment. I do thank you so much for watching today. If you learned something new or just enjoyed the content of this video, please give it a thumbs up. The subscribe button will be coming up in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And talk to you next time, hopefully with Dendrobiums that are doing just a little bit better. So as I was cleaning up that previous filming session, and I was just about ready to put my green lantern orchid back on the shelf under the grow light, I noticed down at the bottom of the tallest cane some positive signs, and so maybe all is not lost. I'm hoping that the camera can focus in right here, but at the bottom of this cane, right there, is some new root growth, a very hopeful sign. And then, in addition to that, on the other side of the cane, it's as nearly microscopic as the spider mites, but there's another little tiny root growth right there. Always a positive sign when you see new roots emerging.